GeePawHill in the house after a long delay. Had some hardware troubles, kids. I'm sorry it took me so long to get back with this. Anyway, it's all good now. This is the file we were working on, our friend Annotation Validation Configuration Builder. Now, I have actually made 2 changes behind the scenes since the last time we talked. I did 2 things that I basically would always do anytime I'm going to work on a piece of legacy code. That is, first, I formatted the file to keep my house standard. Okay, you can get your house standard loaded right into Eclipse. It's quite easy in this guy, Java Code Style Formatter. As you can see, I use a custom one that's built just the way I like things. So that's one of the things I did. Second thing I did was I cleaned up all the warnings. There were exactly 10 warning messages coming out of this file. The first 6 of them had to do simply with the fact that we were making use of this deprecated validation object. So I fixed that easily enough. I just went for a straight suppression of warnings. There were 4 other warnings. 3 of them were really simple, and they had to do with the use of class. Class, when being referred to without knowing the type in the new 1.6 JDK, is class open angle, question mark, close angle. So that occurred in 3 different places. All I had to do was change those to get it to go. I'm down to 1 error left, and what it was declared a variable that was never used. So since it was never used, I got rid of it. Now I am at 0 warnings. This is important because I want to get to a place where everything that comes to me is signal and nothing that comes to me is noise. That's what I'm working on here. Okay, now that we've talked about what I did when you were gone, let's talk about what this class does right now. It has a public constructor, only one, and it takes an argument of type validator factory. He immediately signs that into a field called this.validator factory. So public constructor, and there are 2 public functions. This one is the first one, resolve property name. Essentially, this class is all about using the reflection library that's in Java. So sometimes we get past a method, and the method has a name that's useful to us along the lines of set Fred open parens argument, as well as get Fred. In either case, the result of resolving this property name would be to return the string Fred. Now, that's my quickie version of it, but the gist of this method is simply that when you call resolve property name on a method, you want to get out what the best guess is of what field that method name refers to. Notice there's always the possibility that it's null, that there is no good candidate for that. All right, we have one more function that's public, and it's actually a very straightforward one right here. I don't know what a validator config is. I don't much care. But remember that this is an annotation, validation, configuration builder. So a validator config, in fact, a list of them, is what this guy produces as a class. He builds the annotation class validator configs. So he builds this list. He's passed a given class. He takes that class. He calls a function called process annotations on the class. At that point, he will get another output list, which he's calling temp. And then, if temp isn't null, he adds it back into result. The same thing happens after this. When we take the class, we get the declared methods. So we get that array of methods. And then we walk over it. And in the same way that we called process annotations against the class, we now call process annotations against the method. All right? Hopefully there are no questions because it's really hard for me to hear you. I think it's probably because I'm getting old. If the class was all this simple and it just had these 2 things in it, I probably wouldn't say too much about it. But actually, it's a lot more complex than that. So remember this process annotations? Let's take a look. It takes a type of object. There's my first complaint right there. We happen to know that everybody we call process annotations on is either a class or a method. We know that because it's a private function and the calls are down below. Again, we build ourselves a result object. That's fine. We get some local variables here, field name and method name. And then we get an array full of annotations. Okay. Now watch what's happening here. If the object that's passed in is a class, then get his annotations. Okay, that's all there is to it. He has to do this cast, or does he? followed immediately by if it's an object of method, in which case it's almost the same. He casts it to a method, and he does eventually call getAnnotations, but in the meanwhile, he tells the method to get its name, and he calls that other public function resolvePropertyName. At this point, we've built our annotations, and now we're going to loop through the annotations. For each possible class of annotation, essentially they're going to be a branch. If A is an instance of a validations object, then process a validation annotation. Moving down a little further, otherwise, if A is an instance of a custom validator, then do the casting and tell the system to process a custom validator. In each time, these sub-process functions always take V for the validator in question, a field name, and a method name, which may in fact be null. Essentially, that's what all of this repetition is in here. We're walking through one step at a time, deciding which validation is given to us, then we're casting it, then we're calling a specific function that knows how to deal with that. All right, let's take a look at one of those functions and see what we can see. Wow, that was a long list, wasn't it? Feeling a little nervous? That's good. Nerves are good. But take a look at some of these. Process an expression validator annotation. And essentially what he appears to be doing is just adding one or more, not even one or more, just one validator config. We'll come back to this all in a little bit, but I'll tell you where I'm at right now. Emotionally, I want some action. So that's it for our quickie summary of what this class does. Believe it or not, and this may challenge some of you, you are all ready to begin microtesting and refactoring. You don't need to know anything more than what we just went over. So stay tuned. Very next issue, we will take resolvePropertyName and break him out. Bye-bye, kids, and listen, drive safe.